Ladies and gentlemen, you want to know how I got these scars? Hello everyone, this is Dick Lucas. You know what it is when we do what we do. No Gradient Show, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're coming at you on YouTube Live, available wherever podcasts are available. Search No Gradient wherever you like listening to podcasts. We got Chuck Finley, as always, in the chat room on YouTube Live. That's where we take our questions. We riff on them at the end. Just a little quick opener before we get into what we're going to talk about on the show. We had an epic interview last week. Got a lot of good feedback on that. That was electric with George Perks. It was electric. The guy was firing at all cylinders, which I loved. It's hard to get people on here that are just in it for the riff. He had a cocktail glass on his shirt. He was boozing. It was chill. That's what we want on the show. That's what I'm going to keep trying to deliver to you. It's tough to get people comfortable like that, especially when I've never met him like that. That was a cold open. Never met him, and it was epic. One thing I do want to talk, just to say real quick about that interview last week, is that, listen, the guy, he was great. I love the way he was putting things down. The only thing I would say is that the level of certainty, he seemed pretty certain than with some of these things. And we're going to talk a little about this. We have a good Warren Buffett quote, which I shared with him after the show, about a lot of things are going on right now that we just can't know the answers to, right? So I get up here and I have this idea, or rather I used to have this idea that, okay, there's these things going on in the world. There's these Fed actions, central bank actions. There's negative interest rates in Europe. There's a worldwide pandemic. There's these things that have never happened before, ever. And what I earlier on in the show, I would say, okay, well, if I read enough, there'll be an answer. I just have to find the answer. No. You got people, you got experts on every side of the aisle. There's things that our consensus is on. There's consensus around, but a lot of things we have no idea. We don't have a lot of answers to questions with the virus. We don't have answers to economically what we're going through. There's a lot of things up in the air right now. So again, I warn you, and I'm not a charlatan on this show. If I know something, I'm gonna tell you I know it. If I don't know, I'm gonna be straight up on that. There's gonna be a lot of charlatans out there. I mean, you see them on cable news every day. People being certain about an uncertain world. We got a pandemic going on right now, unprecedented government and central bank action. Oil's at an all-time fucking low. There's a lot of things going on right now that have never happened before, and you put them all together, and it's game over. We're gonna riff a little bit more on that. Howard Marks had an epic memo all about uncertainty. So we're going to riff on that. In fact, okay, so let's get into what we're going to talk about on the show. So we have Fiona Harvey, award-winning climate environmental journalist. She writes for the Guardian, spent a decade at the Financial Times, which Financial Times, electric publication. I don't have so we're going to riff with her on some climate change stuff specifically. That's at 1 p.m., an hour into the show. Again, that's what we're going to do. So first hour is me and you riffing. You're going to be posting questions, shit like that, which I'll get to after the interview. And then at 1 p.m., that's when the interviews come on. We're going to have 1-2 interviews. That's kind of what we've settled on. And I think that's the model that the folks like, the people like out there. That's the model that I think is the most fun too, because I need an hour riffing with you. I need an hour talking to you. I need an hour in front of the mic, me and Chuck Finley doing our thing. So, okay, we're also going to talk about, there were a couple epic articles in Foreign Affairs, which I think is a great publication. It is a little academic. It's a lot of, fucking professors talking about things that are happening in the real world, which can, I'm a little skeptical of sometimes, which is why, I quote a lot of, I read a lot of, things. Take Howard Marks, for example, or memos, and we're going to talk about Paul Tudor Jones. These aren't economists. These are people that make a living working in the markets, not talking about them. So I like looking at sources like that. But they are these are excellent sources. These are excellent pieces. We got the Climate Club and Path to Net 2020. We're going to riff on that. It's going to talk about the technology we need to address climate change. It's also going to talk about how countries can come together. Think Kyoto Protocol, think Paris Climate Accord. The issue with those two things is there are no repercussions for not hitting your climate targets. There's a proposal to actually put tariffs on countries that don't hit their climate targets. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Howard Marks memo after that. Hopefully we have time. We're already 5 minutes in. Damn. Howard Marks has a memo. He hasn't written one for 6 weeks. It's just called Uncertainty. The whole thing is just basically no one knows what the fuck's going on. So it's electric. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then Paul Tudor Jones, he has his memo that he released to investors. I believe he's a hedge fund. He's a big time investor. I believe he runs a hedge fund. he has a post called The Great Monetary Inflation, and he talks about why he's looking at Bitcoin and why he's putting a small position, a single-digit % position, I believe in Bitcoin futures, not actual Bitcoin. So he's betting on the price of Bitcoin. And it's super, super interesting. Again, we're going to talk about things on this show that I think are going to be relevant in a decade. I really, really think cryptocurrency, there's something here with it. There's something here. And I'm not just talking about the price. Okay, I'm talking about what you can actually do with it and how it's better than traditional technology. So we're going to riff on that. We've got then we're going to talk about Warren Buffett had an epic quote on what's going on economically. Remember, we've riffed on his shareholder meeting that he had about 2 weeks ago. It's like 4.5 hours long. Didn't finish the whole thing. I might finish it, but anyway, he had an epic quote, and I just want to share it. I'm just going to read it verbatim. It's epic. Then we're going to talk about Reddit. Dipping their toes into cryptocurrency. So I said there's something here. I've been saying it ever since we started this fucking show. And even before the show, I've been tweeting about this stuff for fucking years. I really, really believe there's something special here. Anyway, Reddit has 300 million users, monthly active users, and they are starting to dip their toes in cryptocurrency. We're going to talk about how they're going to do that. And then after that, hopefully we have time to get to that. If we don't, again, all this stuff, I just kick it to the next week. If we don't have time, we only have, what do we got? We got 54 minutes left, and we got Fiona Harvey again at 1 p.m. Riff with her for about 20, 25, maybe 30 minutes, depending. And then after that, we'll riff for a second on a few questions. And then we'll just fucking, we'll close her out. Okay, so let's get into the first thing. Ooh, actually, I want to riff on one more thing. We got class of 2020. I got a cousin that just graduated. There's the graduation's in the air. Chuck Finley, Fukin, producer of the show. He's at UCLA right now. Not graduating yet, but this is something I think about, and I always I wanted like a little message to the graduates. So what I want to say, and I've been riffing on this, and I've spoken about this, not on the show before, but I've riffed on it with people. Listen, here's what I've seen a pattern happens. People, they leave, they graduate, they get a job. They get a nice job. Hopefully they're earning money. It feels good. It feels good for the first time in your life. You're independent. You're getting a paycheck. You're doing your thing. You're living alone. It's an amazing feeling. Now you do that for about a year or two, and the whole money thing wears off pretty fucking quickly. In terms of the actual making it, like, okay, cool, I made money. That wears off first. Then you're like, okay, I'm liking what I'm doing. Hopefully you're liking what you're doing. Then that starts to wear off. And the only thing I want to say to fucking graduates is this: be honest with yourself, because a lot of people I know, personal friends, after 2 or 3 years, you fucking do your job. You poke your head up and you're like, dude, is this it? You're looking down the barrel of 40 years and you're thinking, holy shit, there's got to be something else. There's got to be something more. And there is. Now listen, if you do work at the same job for 40 years, there's nothing wrong with that. The only thing I'll say is be honest with yourself. If that is bringing you fulfillment and you're liking what you're doing, you go into work like, let's fucking rip it. Then by all means do it. But I think there's a lot of people that are not honest with themselves, that are doing a job that they don't like because it's comfortable. You get that steady paycheck, and you're just humming along, and you can go out to eat, and you can kind of have a nice little house. You can buy the new iPhone every year. It's an addiction. Now here's what I'll say to that. Now I'm not saying money is very important. I'm not saying evade money. In fact, I think the people that chase money give money a bad name. Money is extremely, extremely valuable. It's a poor master, but an excellent servant. Someone smarter than me said that. I forgot who. So listen, go for the money. In fact, when I graduated, when most people graduate, you don't know what the fuck you want to do. It's the first time you have a job. So honestly, it's not a bad idea to, go with something that's going to give you some money so that you can save that money the first few years. Don't fucking spend it. Save as much as you can, because that's going to be your fucking safety net. That's going to allow you to springboard and try something new. If after 3-4 years you're kind of working your job, you've made it, you've got a good nest egg, that allows you to maybe take some time off, do something epic. Maybe that allows you to take just try to start your own thing for 6 months, 3 months, whatever. And guess what? If it doesn't work out, you can go back. Corporate America is always waiting for you. You can always go back to that. This whole bullshit of gap in the resume. Come on, that's not a fucking thing. Oh, what were you doing? Dude. As long as you're fucking grinding on someone, you go in there and try to get a fucking job, and they're like, "What's the gap?" Well, listen, I was grinding on my business, didn't work out. Blah blah blah. Boom, you're a legend. You're gonna learn a hell of a lot. You don't even have to start your own business. Maybe you want to travel. Maybe you want to take some time off. My point is, You need to save the money to do that, and money is important, but don't let it become the end. Let it become the means to go do what you want to do. So 2020 graduates, you're going to be getting, it's a lot of you, many of you will get going, and even in this climate, are going to be making a nice pretty penny, more money than you know what to do with. So you're going to start throwing at things you don't need. And what I'm telling you to do is save that money. Save that money so that you can do something that you want to do later. Money is freedom. Money is power. That's what fucking is. Now, don't get a fucking addicted to the money itself. Get what I'm trying to do is tell you to get hyped about what the money allows you to do, not just having it. What is that? Money, youth is wasted on the young. Money is wasted on the fucking rich. It's wasted on the people that buy big ass houses, buy big ass cars, and keep grinding through the churn machine. Don't get up in that hamster wheel. If you have the money, if you save the money and use it wisely, you don't buy all this fucking nice shit, you don't do all this, just throw it away. You use it for freedom. You use it to spend your time on the things you want to spend it on, whatever that may be. Maybe it's traveling. Maybe it's starting something new. Maybe it's working for a nonprofit for a year. Maybe it's joining a company that isn't paying as much, but guess what? You saved a lot of money for 3-4 years, and you can take a year off and kind of make a little less while still maintaining your lifestyle. And then you can always go back to corporate America. Dip your toes in, especially when you're young, because guess what? You're gonna be popping fucking kids out in a micro minute, and by that time, that changes the whole fucking game. So anyway, class of 2020, do your thing, save that money. Use it wisely. Don't make it an ends. Use it as a means to fucking do epic shit and do what you want to do. Be honest with yourself. Okay. Now, we're going to riff on this first foreign affairs article. So we've talked about this on the show. COVID-19, I'm constantly thinking, okay, this COVID-19, we were blindsided. Experts were talking about that this would happen. Bill Gates was saying this for years. He said it's microbes, not missiles, that are going to be the next fucking worldwide thing. And guess what? I scrolled through that TED Talk half a fucking dozen times on, let's take that music off. We still got the intro, outro music going. Boom, transition. There we go. Scrolled through that YouTube. I was like, okay, Bill Gates, it's nice. It's nice. You got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I never watched that video. Then boom, COVID-19. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to avoid scrolling through that proverbial YouTube video that I missed. What is the thing I keep coming back to? And I want to hear if there's anything else. I haven't really heard anything close, but climate change is the other slow-moving gorilla in the room that is not, it's in the room. It's here. It's now. And there are things we can do up front, similar to COVID-19, which many countries did not do. There are things we can do up front to mitigate the damage. Now, do I think climate change is going to destroy civilization? Absolutely not. Do I think it could cost trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars and really screw with a lot of people, especially in poor countries? Absolutely. It's not 0 or 1. It's not yes or no. There's a fucking gradient to this, okay? The world is no gradient. That's why the show's named that. Spin on it. But that's what I'm talking about here. So that's why I want to be talking about climate change. Again, that's also why I'm talking about cryptocurrency, because I think it's really, really fucking cool. I mean, even if the whole cryptocurrency thing doesn't work out, I think there's things going on with it. I think it's super interesting in and of itself. But again, these are things that I think are going to be important in a decade time, and climate change is only going to get more and more important every day. So, okay, so the foreign affairs piece, they had an article called The Climate Club. And let's go through. I'm just going to quote some of these pieces here, okay? So, and I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes, as we always do. Also, I'll link to the Patreon if you want to become a monthly contributor, which I appreciate everyone contributing monthly to the show. Me and Barlow, Chuck, Finley are splitting that, and we appreciate it. Let's us spend more time working on this, and we feel the energy from you, and we really, really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get right into it. It starts out. The quick spread of COVID-19 is a grim reminder of how global forces respect no boundaries and of the perils of ignoring global problems until they threaten to overwhelm countries that refuse to prepare and cooperate. Okay, so let me say one thing, people. I think I was a little ahead of the curve. I think No Gradient was a little ahead of the curve on this. Fukin, I was like, okay, climate change. It kept coming back to climate change. And then Fukin, The Economist, and Foreign Affairs, they're barking the climate change thing. Now, it's a pretty obvious thing. I'm not calling myself a genius. I am saying, though, it's validating, right? It's a lot of people, a lot of fucking super smart people. I'm not putting myself in that category, but I am saying Foreign Affairs economists, these people, they are super smart people. They're starting to think about this. COVID-19, as far as I'm concerned, we're not even talking about that much on the show right now. We're going to get through it. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, but we braced against that initial hit. At least the developed countries. I think it's still to be seen, especially in developing countries, what it's going to do there. But the hospitals didn't get overrun. Boom, we hit that first. We fought off that first wave. So now it's okay. We're going to get through it. So now I'm thinking, okay, what's fucking next? And of course, we're still going to riff on COVID-19. But here, let's keep going here. The prisoner's dilemma occurs in a strategic situation in which the actors have incentives to make themselves better off at the expense of other parties. Consider a voluntary agreement, such as the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Accord. No single country has an incentive to cut its emissions sharply. Suppose that when country A spends $100 on abatement, global damages decline by $200, but country A might get only $20 worth of the benefits. Its national cost-benefit analysis would lead it to not undertake the abatement. It's pretty hilarious that, things like the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Climate Accord. Now, I don't think the U.S. should have left it. Absolutely not. I think it was a symbolic, absolute dumpster fire that we left that. The funny thing is with these things is it's tough because there's no repercussions. Anyone can sign a fucking piece of paper that says anything. That doesn't mean anything. There are no repercussions for not being part of the for signing on the Paris Climate Accord and then not reducing those emissions by the set amount in the accord. Now, it's a huge symbolic thing. The whole world coming together on something is huge, and I don't think we should have left it for a microsecond. But what it does kind of get me is, well, what the fook? If you can just sign a piece of paper and it doesn't do anything, what is that even? There's no skin in the game there. So here's what we're gonna talk about a strategy to fix that. Here we go. With penalty tariffs on non-participants, the Climate Club would create a situation in which countries acting in their self-interest would choose to enter the club and undertake ambitious emission reductions because of the structure of the payoffs. A second and more promising approach would be a uniform tariff on all imports from non-club countries into the club. Take as an example a penalty tariff of 5%. If non-participant country A exported $100 billion worth of goods into the club countries, it would be penalized with $5 billion in tariffs. Okay, so this is basically saying that you join the club and part of this is joining the club and pricing carbon in your economy, in your country. You price carbon at a certain amount, have that legislation on the fucking books. And if you don't join this club, if you don't price carbon, then there's going to be, the whole world is going to agree, okay, we're going to slap tariffs on you. We're going to slap, in this case, the number. It's a very interesting take on the problem. Okay, so here's a very specific example. One case is a regime with a carbon price of $25 per ton and a penalty tariff of 3%. With this regime, it is in the national interest of every region to participate, and it is in the interest of no region to defect and free ride. The coalition of all regions is stable because the losses from the tariff for non-participants are larger than the costs of abatement for participants. That's $25 per ton and a penalty tariff of 3% on any imported goods from a country that is not pricing carbon at $25 per ton. Now there's some complications here. It's harder for developing countries to do things like this, and that's a worthy concern. But again, this is just a way to frame it. We've talked about this on the show, but pricing carbon, I think, is I just read what the fucking experts are saying, and this isn't a partisan thing. Pricing carbon. There's different things. There's different ways. There's been cap and trade policies where you can cap the amount of carbon. If you want to pollute more than that, then you have to basically buy credits from other countries. It creates basically a polluting market. But a carbon tax, it's partisan. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal with a bunch of people economists on the left, on the right, not just economists, but or was it all economists? I actually forget, but it was people on the left and the right, and they were saying, listen, the carbon tax is the easiest, most simple way to fucking do this, because if you price carbon. If you put a price on carbon, that's going to increase the cost of it. Now, what happens in a market where costs are increased? Well, consumers look elsewhere. or it makes other options more attractive. Maybe that electric vehicle is going to look more attractive because gas is that much more expensive. Maybe a utility company is going to try to consider nuclear, going to try to consider solar panels, going to try to consider wind, because a coal plant or a natural gas plant, which a lot of coal plants get shut down, natural gas is kind of the new hotness, and is actually the reason why carbon emissions in the United States have dropped, because natural gas is actually pretty fucking clean, the way it burns. I don't know % how much cleaner it is than than coal, but it is cleaner. But if you price carbon, it lets the market decide how it wants to go, versus the government choosing winners and losers, which a lot of people, especially on the right, have issues with. Things like subsidies for electric cars, which I think we need to do. I think there are certain things that, okay, well, this is a pretty obvious thing. We need to push this in the right. We need to push this in the right direction. But as far as what's kind of the overarching thing that we can do here, I think a carbon tax is super interesting. Now, that's from the Wall Street Journal. They did that, and The Economist has also been talking about it now. Foreign Affairs. I think there's some consensus around a fucking carbon tax, and it blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind that in the fucking zeitgeist of political campaigns and the politicians that are rising to fucking power that are, or even your fucking Bidens of the world, why are they not? I don't hear anything about a carbon tax. I don't hear anything about that, and it's super fucking surprising me. I'm gonna run for president in 2032, and we're gonna fix that. Just kidding, but seriously. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more interesting. We're going to talk about, they have another article. Again, we're going to link to all this stuff. You do need a subscription to Foreign Affairs, but I think you can see a couple free. I forget, but I'm going to link to all this stuff. There's another article called The Paths to Net Zero. Now, this is a two-sided problem, right? There's the legislation. There's the legislation of, okay, all these countries, let's get on board with something like a Kyoto Protocol, which I believe was in the 90s. Then there's the Paris Climate Accord. There's that side of it. There's the government. There's politicians making legislation, right? That is that's one aspect of this. The other aspect is we need fucking technology to get fucking better. If we want to get off our addiction to fucking oil, which yes, we have a fucking addiction. Technology needs to get better. Batteries need to get better. Solar panels, which are they've gotten so much better than experts were going to predict. This last decade, they've gotten a lot cheaper. Wind's getting better. All these things are getting better. Things need to be getting better even faster. We need to double down on this stuff. So that's the other side of this. It's the technology. I think a lot of people don't realize is oil. You got your coal power plants, natural gas. These things, they're super valuable. Unlike your wind, unlike your solar, because wind doesn't generate energy and solar doesn't generate energy when the sun ain't shining and the wind ain't blowing. Okay, oil or coal or natural gas, there isn't that kind of peak that on you have a lot more control over when you can fire it up and when you can fire it down. You don't have as much control with solar and wind, and that is an issue. That is an issue with these technologies. That's not as much of an issue with nuclear. Nuclear, I don't know how long it takes to spin up and spin down in terms of how much output it can feed to the grid. Feel free to chime in on the comments if you know that. But it is better than fucking solar and wind, because if there's no wind and there's no sun, then you're out of luck. So really, even if we wanted to, even if we could flip a switch, okay, let's just say we had 100 square miles of solar panels, which I think it takes something like that to power meet all of the U.S.'s energy needs, whatever it is. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. It's some insane amount. But if we just flip the switch and then boom, okay, we have that many solar panels. They were just built right away. It still wouldn't work. We don't have the battery tech. And what happens at night? What happens when the sun is blocked by clouds, et cetera, et cetera? So there still needs to be improvements. It's not just about fucking getting the stuff out there. We still need to do that, but we still need to improve. We're still in the improvement phase. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is the paths to net zero, and I'm going to quote some things here. Okay, and again, Fiona Harvey is going to be on at 1 p.m. In about 35 minutes, and we're going to riff on some of this stuff, and we're super psyched that she's on. Okay. Technological progress in clean electricity has already set off a virtuous cycle, with each new innovation creating more political will to do even more. And I want to say one more thing on this. Why I'm so much more interested in the technology aspect, because politicians are going to do what they do. They're going to sign on to the thing, Paris climate. They're going to fucking leave it like the U.S. did. They're going to, well, that was more of a Trump thing, not politicians in general. But listen, at the end of the day, the one main thing that is going to make us get off our addiction to oil, it's the simplest thing in the world. It's the Elon Musk model. It's the Tesla model. Make it better. Make it better. A Tesla in almost every single fucking way. Now, they are more expensive than a lot of internal combustion engine vehicles, but a Tesla is almost better in every single fucking way to a conventional car. It's insane. It's faster. The technology's better. That's how we're going to win this. The tech needs to be better. You need to have these fucking these capital markets that allocate things that are going to make money, and they're going to be the best return on investment. If the technology's there, the investment will follow. Now, granted, some of these things take fucking you gotta push them in the right direction. This isn't just a market-based thing that can solve this. But if the technology's there, then if that problem is solved, if we had a battery that we could produce tomorrow that could store a shit ton of energy, and it was super cheap to make, well then boom, that would be fucking huge. Now there's a big battery project going on in San Diego. I believe it's the biggest in the world. I got a homie working on it. I ask him about it every time we talk. It's fucking epic. But there's a huge amount of batteries that are getting charged. Now they get charged via solar. They get charged via, it doesn't matter what charge. I think they also get charged via coal, natural gas, whatever. But it allows the grid to be more resilient. Allows it to address demand, because a battery, boom, you can deliver that energy on and off. The electrons are there, boom, you can deliver them. So if this technology gets better, the rest will fucking follow. That it's just going to be, it's a virtuous cycle, as they said. That's why I'm saying, God, there's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can do in fucking in legislation. And frankly, the U.S. has been slow on the uptake here. But everyone can agree. If the technology is better, you can't argue with it. There's literally no reason to be. There's no reason to be on oil now. You talk about the gas lobby, the ExxonMobil, these big fucking super companies, the Shells of the world. They absolutely have politicians in their pockets. Absolutely, they absolutely contribute to politicians via super PACs and all that. That is true. But at the end of the day, these companies don't necessarily. Well, these companies specifically, sure, but people want to allocate capital where they're going to get the biggest return. That's where the market's going to go. They like oil right now because it's fucking cheap. It's easy to transport. It has all these good properties, yeah, and it fucks up the earth for sure. But we're not pricing that in right now, unfortunately, which is what a carbon tax would do. But if the technology is better, if something is categorically better, then you can't argue with it, and you're going to make more money with it, and it's going to be cheaper. Boom, end of story. Okay, let's continue this quote here. Replicating this symbiosis of technology and politics in other sectors is essential. In most other high-emission industries, however, deep decarbonization has been much slower to arrive. In sectors such as transportation, steel, cement, and plastics, companies will continue to resist profound change unless they are convinced that decarbonization represents not only costs and risks for investors, but also an opportunity to increase value and revenue. Today, and that's just what we riffed on. Today, Western economies convert about 30% of their energy into electric power. If they want to get serious about decarbonization, that fraction will need to double or more. Getting there will require progress on two fronts. The first is the electrification of tasks that use vast amounts of energy but still rely on fossil fuels, such as transportation and heating. Overall, transportation accounts for 27% of global energy use, and nearly all of it relies on oil. So, just a quick thing here. I think people, and I get confused on this sometimes too, when people say, "Oh, we need to move to green energy," okay, well, like cars need to be electric. Okay, that's true, but there's also a whole bunch of energy production that isn't just about. I think cars are kind of the target because you see the exhaust coming out of the back and be like, "That's a polluting thing," and yes, it is. But there's a whole bunch of other energy generation. That you don't see that pollute. So even if we had all electric cars, let's see, the car industry, I forgot what percent here. Yeah, transportation accounts for 27% of global energy use. I believe that that accounts cargo ships as well, which is a big polluter. Airplanes, I believe, as well would be considered in that. Vehicles, so that's part of it. Even if all those things with electric, that's one part of it. There's still, okay, what about the light bulb in your house? What about the power that you go to your house? What about these industrial processes like making cement? What about those things? So there's all these different sectors of the economy. This isn't just a one fix. This is it's a very, very, very complex. That's maybe a strong, very, very, very complex. I mean, it's not super, super complex, but my point is it's stratified. My point is there's multiple battles here that need to take place, which is why something like a carbon tax is it makes sense, because you're not targeting you're not playing whack-a-mole with different industries and different needing all this fucking legislation. It's literally, if you're emitting, boom, carbon tax, done. And there's also, which I don't think the Wall Street Journal piece said this, but The Economist said make it revenue neutral, which means, okay, increase tax on carbon. Now that would hurt, and something they pointed out in their article is that would hurt the poor, because they spend a higher percentage of their income on gasoline than other people. Than rich people, or people that make more money than they do. So that bottom 20-30%, if you do a carbon tax, well, that's going to screw them, and that means they're paying as a percent basis. That means they're paying more than your fucking guy in his nice 2-story house and his Corvette, who takes it to the racetrack and gets 9 miles a gallon and races it. So it's like, that's why you can't just do carbon tax. You need to, okay, well, if you're going to do a carbon tax, you're going to need to lower taxes somewhere else, because make it revenue neutral. That'll also make it less political. Again, things that are, as much as you can go bipartisan, okay? So then that means somehow people that have a higher percentage of their income taken by transportation costs, like purchasing gas, going to the tank, going to the gas station, somehow they need to get a kickback. So there's some nuance to it. Like everything, there's nuance to it, but that's something to think about. There's layers to this. Okay, the car industry has had some success in changing this. The latest electric vehicles rival high-end conventional cars in performance and cost, and electric cars now make up around 8% of new sales in California, although only 8% of new sales in California, because California's got some better subsidies, and I think they have the best subsidies in the United States, if not top 2 or 3 subsidies for electric vehicles. I believe it's the first 200,000 cars of each model get a subsidy, something like that. Although only 1.3% nationwide, 1.3% of vehicles in the U.S. Sold today are electric. That is abysmal. And nearly 56% in Norway, where the government offers massive subsidies to buyers. Here's another thing I think people don't realize. Think about, even if every new car today was sold electric, 100%. So that 1.3% nationwide gas using vehicles. Besides the fact that I think our grid could not handle that. If our grid's not ready for that, because a lot of if everyone's plugging their car in at night, then that's going to put a lot of strain on the grid. And I don't think it's even possible right now if we went 100% electric. But even if we did that, cars last a lot longer now. Every single every single internal combustion engine vehicle that is sold today, right now, will be on the road at least 10 years. Maybe even 15 years. These cars are lasting a hell of a lot longer. So this is there's a long fucking tail to this, right? Even if we started right now, 100%, these gas using cars, fucking 15 years, boom, on the road, done. So that's another thing to think about, why I think we need to fucking wake the fuck up and do something. As Elon Musk says, it's the world's dumbest experiment. Okay, a modern battery can store, I love this stat here. A modern battery can store only 2% of the energy contained in a comparable weight of jet fuel, meaning that any electric airplane would need to carry an extremely heavy load in batteries to travel any reasonable distance. That's insane. You have a battery that weighs 100 pounds. That has as much energy as fucking, 2 pounds of oil? 2 pounds of fuel. That's insane. But that right there is a huge barrier to entry. That's why I'm talking about battery tech. I imagine a world where, instead of these big cargo super tankers carrying oil, what if they were carrying super high density batteries? What if the batteries we're twice as energy dense as gasoline, as oil. And then what if these cargo supercarriers were bringing giant Fukin state-of-the-art batteries to different countries that plug them into the grid? Then different countries could trade those batteries. How insane would that be? That would be fucking epic. That would be. I think we could live in a world like that. It's going to take a hell of a long time, but let's keep riffing. Besides transportation, the most important electrification frontier is heating, not just in buildings, but as part of industrial production too. All told, heating consumes about half the raw energy that people and firms around the world use. Of that fraction, some 50% goes into industrial processes that require very high temperatures, such as the production of cement and steel and the refining of oil. Again, it's not just when you flip on the switch at home, it's when you turn that heat on. That's using gas. Most of the time it's using gas. There's all these things that need to be electrified for this to work. The United States, for its part, has cut down on its emissions thanks to innovations in horizontal drilling and fracking that have made it economically viable to extract shale gas. In 2005, when this technology first became commercially relevant, coal accounted for half of all the electricity produced in the United States. Okay, 2005, coal, half the electricity in the U.S. Today, coal's share is down to 1/4, with much cleaner and inexpensive natural gas and renewables making up the difference. Now, another thing you'll hear a lot from people on the left, and there's valid concerns. I think they're overblown. There are issues with fracking. There are cases when water tables have been absolutely pooched, and there's negatives to it. But on the whole, most of the time they're drilling way below the water table, and if done properly, which a lot of the times it is done properly, there is no issue. Now, the interesting thing there is natural gas is a huge reason that the U.S. is emitting less carbon than it was 5 years ago. We're actually on a downward trend of carbon, which is insane to think about. But part of that is this fracking that a lot of people don't like. And listen, I wish the whole thing was electric too. But again, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Do I think that it's a worth it trade-off to have fracking, horizontal drilling, and all this stuff? And if some cases there are accidents that happen, but we're lowering our emissions, I think that's worth it. Again, that's how you have to view these things. Everything is a trade-off, okay? There is no fucking solution, okay? In the West, however, major expansions are not on the horizon. Public opposition is strong, and the cost of building new so this is talking about nuclear energy. Okay, so it goes on. In the West, however, major expansions are not on the horizon. Public opposition is strong, and the cost of building new reactors is high, in part because countries have built too few reactors to benefit from the savings that come with repetition and standardization. It is, I think, an absolute sin that nuclear energy is not one of the pieces on the table on how we can combat climate change. It's a clean energy. Now, granted, we got to put the spent cells somewhere, and yeah, that's a whole other thing, but I think that is a world like class 5 or 6 now. They're a lot safer, and they have a much lower chance of melting down. They are very, very safe technology, and the fact that people are fucking scared of them, it's inhibiting it. Absolutely. It's sad. Okay. In California, now this is talking about some bureaucracy here. In California, for example, the most recent big power line designed to move renewable power will be useful. In that case, from the sunny desert to San Diego, took a decade to build, even though the technical engineering construction portion of the project should have consumed no more than 10 years. China, by contrast, has blown past the efforts of the United States and Europe, with dozens of ultra-high voltage lines, most of them built in the last decade, crisscrossing the country. That's another part of this. It's not just energy generation, it's getting it where it needs to go. China ate our lunch. China's eaten Europe's lunch too. 10 years to build from fucking with solar panels in the desert, get that to San Diego. Are you fucking kidding me? 10 fucking years. That's insane. This is the type of thing when there needs to be regulation is neither inherently good nor inherently bad. It all comes down to how it's done and what it's doing. Okay? In this case, 10 years to build a fucking power line. They weren't inventing a new technology here. They were building something. And again, I don't know the details of this, but these are the things that it's not gonna fucking move. Even in a green state like California, 10 years to deliver clean energy, we need to shift. And we talked a little bit about this with our former CIA analyst. We need to shift the whole way institutions work here. Okay, because that's fucking insane. Okay, the great technological transformation of the 19th century was to harness the power, and this is how we're going to close out with this piece. The great technological transformation of the 19th century was to harness the power of fossil fuels for industrial growth. The 20th century rode the wave of innovation that followed and inadvertently put the planet on track for massive warming. Oopsies. The defining industrial project of this century will be to leave carbon behind. Yeah. So I think another piece to it here is also, I don't know if oil will ever go away. Not even if all our energy, none of our energy is using oil. It's big. It's big in plastics, and there's other things that are built using oil that it's not just for energy. And Saudi Aramco, which is the most valuable company in the world, it's the state-run oil company of Saudi Arabia. They released, I think, 2% of their shares on the public markets, and they're valued at $2 trillion or something, like 2 apples or something. In their prospectus thing to investors, they said they had some crazy stuff, and they're like, when the last drop of oil is harvested, it will come from Saudi Aramco. Like they're like, we will be there until the fucking bitter end, and they're gonna claw with their fingernails to keep this stuff going. So I thought that was super. Interesting. Okay, so what we're gonna do here now is we're gonna talk. I was gonna talk about Howard Marks' uncertainty stuff, but we only got 19 minutes, and we want to riff on. I think I'd rather riff on this Bitcoin stuff. I think that's more interesting. By Paul Tudor Jones. I think it's more interesting right now because the Spark Notes on. Oh, you know what? Well, let's riff on Warren Buffett's quote. Then we'll talk about the Great Monetary Inflation by Paul Tudor Jones. And then basically, oh God, Howard Marks, he's such a legend. Basically, his whole piece is just coming down to just uncertainty, in that there's no way we can know the repercussions of the things we're doing now, and also there's no way we can know what's going to happen next. So it's an absolutely fantastic piece. I highly recommend you read it. I'll link to it. But let's talk about Warren Buffett's quote for a second, because we had George Perks on, and that was a great riff session. It wasn't even just an interview; it was a riff session. I mean, he was doing 90% of the talking, but I loved him for it. It was epic. And I was outgunned for sure on that interview. I was outgunned. But he was having a good faith argument. He wasn't trying to go for the jugular. He was just spraying. He was telling it like it is, and I appreciate him for doing that. But again, one of the things there, I want to urge people that it's very difficult to be certain about anything at this time. And I think what is that fucking Mark Twain quote that's attributed to him? It's not the things we don't know that get us into trouble. It's the things that you're not going to go, all the way fucking in if you're unsure about something. But if you just know something for sure, well, caution to the wind and rip it. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. Warren Buffett's quote on negative interest rates and the Fed balance sheets. We really don't know what's going to happen. Okay, here's his quote. It's epic. And again, I want you to think about when you listen to this quote, think about what the government's doing. Think about the stimulus that's happening. Not only the stimulus, the biggest stimulus by far was being done by the United States, but also the biggest increase in the Fed's balance sheets. They're buying fucking bonds. They're buying bonds on the fucking the public markets, right? That's never been done before. We've never done this, and because we've never done it, we don't know what the fuck is going to happen. Listen, that's fucking science 101. And unfortunately, the way the real world works is this is an experiment. You can't run the counterfactual. We don't know what would have happened if we did X. That's the beauty of kind of humanity, and that's the whole game we play. This isn't in a fucking lab in a petri dish. You don't input X and always get Y. That's not how this shit works, which is why it's so difficult, and which is why we're all stumbling along and trying to figure it out. Okay, here's what he says. I don't see how you can if you can have negative interest rates and pour out money and incur more and more debt relative to productive capacity, you'd think the world would have discovered it in the first couple thousand years and just coming on it now. It's probably the most interesting question I've seen in economics. Can you keep doing what we're doing now? We've been able to do it. The world's been able to do it for now a dozen years or so, but we may be facing a period where we are testing that hypothesis that you can continue it with a lot more force, and we've tested it before. I'd love to be Secretary of the Treasury if I knew I could keep raising money at negative interest rates. That makes life pretty simple. We're doing something We're doing something that we really don't know the ultimate outcome. And I think in general they're the right things, but I don't think they're without. I think in general they're the right things, but they're not without consequences. And I think they could be kind of extreme consequences if pushed far enough, but there would be kind of extreme consequences if we didn't do it as well. So somebody has to balance those questions. Again, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. I want you to keep thinking about this quote whenever anyone tells you everything. Well, we should do this. Well, yeah, that will fix this, but that will leave uncertainty for why in the future, right? That will leave uncertainty for this thing in the future, or that may hurt this. Everything is a fucking trade-off. There are no silver bullets, okay? There are no fucking silver bullets. So Warren Buffett, one of the greatest business minds, the 20th fucking century. I think he's 89 years old, something like that. He's got a lot of history with this stuff. Bought his first stock when he was 11 years old. He's seen a lot of shit. He never goes. He's not a clickbait guy. A lot of people will say things because they'll get on CNBC and people will like it and people will get them all fired up and kind of stroke their ego. And he's not interested in that. He doesn't care. It doesn't bring him enjoyment. He just says what he thinks. He says what he thinks. He doesn't try to rile people up. He's just saying it plainly, and I love him for it. And I think it's super fucking interesting. Okay, we have 14 minutes. We're doing well here. Okay, so let's go to The Great Monetary Inflation by Paul Tudor Jones. I'm going to link to this. It's a great piece. But this is a legendary investor who's talking about he's talking about Bitcoin. He's talking about why he thinks why he's putting a single digit of his portfolio, single digits. He hasn't said exactly how much, but in the billions of dollars into Bitcoin. Now he manages billions upon billions of dollars. I don't know how exactly much he manages, but my point is he's well respected in the investing community. There are things here. Bitcoin for a long time has been kind of a fringe thing. And you look at where it's at right now. We're in an economic crisis, a world crisis, and the price has gone up. Now, initially it went down. The U.S. dollar, everyone flooded to dollars, right? It's outperformed the S&P 500 this year by a long shot. Now, that doesn't mean. Now, listen, I'm not saying put all your money in Bitcoin. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying there is something here with Bitcoin, and people are starting to take notice. Institutional investors are starting to take notice. There's a company called Grayscale, which has billions under management. I think like 3 billion, something like that, 2.6. Institutional investors are starting to take notice. And let's go into this. I think there's really something here. And by the way, let's just say this: if you're going to buy some Bitcoin, don't spend any more of your net worth into it. Just be like, okay, boom, put a little bit in, and then fall asleep and don't even fucking think about it. It's a nice little hedge, and it's fun to own some Bitcoin. Okay, here we go. The depth and magnitude of the economic drop-off took modern monetary theory, which is what we talked about last week with that epic riffer who came on the show. That depth and magnitude of the economic drop-off took modern monetary theory, or the direct monetization of massive fiscal spending, from the theoretical to practice without any debate. It has happened globally with such speed that even a market veteran like myself was left speechless. Just since February, a global total of $3.9 trillion, 6% of GDP, has been magically created through quantitative easing. We are witnessing the great monetary inflation, he calls it GMI, an unprecedented expansion of every form of money unlike anything the developed world has ever seen. We got these estimates on M2. M2 is, I had to look this up. M2 is just, think of it as it's how much money's out there. It's the money supply. Okay, so we got these estimates on M2 from a few of the dinosaurs who still work on Wall Street. Rarely have we ever seen so many economists dismissive of an economic metric than when we asked about their notion on this record M2 growth and its meaning. The last time M2 grew at such a high pace was during World War II, when annual M2 growth peaked at almost 27%. Milton Friedman famously stated that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon that arises from a more rapid expansion in the quantity of money than in total output. And this is what George was talking about last week. He was saying that if the economy is expanding and you're issuing more money, that's okay. But if the economy is not expanding, and again, and I'm saying these things, no one fucking knows, right? These are all just theory. It's all theory, right? But if the economy is not growing and you're issuing more money, the value of the dollar is going to drop and things are going to increase in cost because there's more dollars chasing fewer goods. It's basic supply and demand. Now, what happens in the classroom doesn't always happen in the real world. What happens on the chalkboard doesn't always happen in the real world, okay? You can draw a nice little graph. This is going to happen. That's not how things work, okay? So anything, even saying this, or even anyone is saying that, oh, well, when this happens, this happens. Well, does it happen 100% of the time? Probably not. Unless it happens 100% of the time, you can't say that that's what's going to happen. Okay, so let's continue. And while this relationship between inflation and M2 growth in excess of real output growth has not been stable over short horizons, it seems to hold over longer horizons. There are only a few times in history when M2 growth exceeded real output growth over a 5-year span by the same or faster pace than is currently the case. The inflationary periods of the 1970s and 80s and the late 1940s. But remember, it is reasonable to expect inflation to first fall in the coming months, given the large contraction in demand relative to supply. Furthermore, the risk of a complicit, politically appointed central bank chairman cannot be easily dismissed, given that central bank independence is no longer a sacred cow. Let's talk about central bank independence. So the president appoints them, which I think is hilarious. They're supposed to be independent from the executive branch, but the president appoints them. You know what's funny about the Trump presidency? It's making you realize all these things that the executive branch is not supposed to have control over. Why the fook is the executive branch the one appointing these people? That is what are we even talking about? Now, presidents like in the past, never has anyone gone to the lengths that Trump has to just absolutely eviscerate any semblance of separation of powers and you know, if I'm going to appoint someone, they're going to be independent. That's not how he's ran his office. And with him being always on the central bank historically has been, okay, it's going to do what it do because it thinks it knows better than anyone else, right? It's its job to be impartial, and you can't have the president in their ear just fucking telling them what to do, because it's possible they can do short-term things that don't help in the long term, that maybe gets the president elected, boom, pump out more money, boom, massive fiscal, buy up more assets, pump everything up, boom, the economy's doing great, boom, boom. Well, what happens in 10 years when all that music stops, right? That's why the central bank has historically been a sacred cow. Okay, one thing that piqued my interest from this list of assets and that one day might be brought to prominence by the great monetary inflation is Bitcoin. Truth in advertising, I'm not a hard money nor a crypto nut. I'm not a millennial investing in cryptocurrency, which is very popular in that generation, but a baby boomer who wants to capture the opportunity set while protecting my capital in ever-changing environments. At the end of the day, the best profit maximizing strategy is to own the fastest horse. Just own the best performer and not get wed to an intellectual side that might leave you weeping in the performance dust because you thought you were smarter than the market. If I am forced to forecast, my bet is it will be Bitcoin, and completely open source, and has taken the world by storm, and now has a market cap of $200 billion. It's absolutely insane. This is science fiction. And now, 10 years later, well, 11, 12 years later, we're talking about a massive institutional investor talking about addressing Bitcoin. It's absolutely insane. Now, I don't want to get up here and be talking about crypto, being like, oh, he's that cryptocurrency guy. There's a lot of snake oil out there, and I don't doubt that for a second. There's a lot of people talking about the price. There's also a lot of things besides Bitcoin and things like Ethereum that other companies are trying to release is get-rich-quick schemes, and that just don't have the principles and they don't have the technology, and there's a lot of snake oil out there. But that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to weed through that stuff and give you the deal. Okay, let's talk more. A store of value is anything that holds its purchasing power in the future. It is completely a function of people's perception of its worth. Even tulips at one time were considered a store of value. Financial assets comprise the largest store of wealth in the world, as they generally have the added advantage of providing yield. You own a stock, it goes up, gives you dividends, which helps offset the impact of inflation. Gold has survived the test of time, although a rational person could ask why gold over any other of the 118 elements. Fiat currency, which is cash, is backed by the full faith and credit of the people of that country, although that promise has high variability, as history has shown. And the newest entrant is Bitcoin, which seems to have emerged from the crypto war of 2017 as the clear winner with a market cap of 10x than its closest competitor. So I would take issue with Bitcoin, and it does have 10x that of Ethereum, but they do different things. It's not all just about market cap, but it's absolutely insane what's going on here. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so let's keep going here. I also made the case for owning Bitcoin, the quintessence of scarcity premium. It is literally the only large tradable asset in the world that is a known fixed maximum supply. Okay, so what gives gold value? Well, it's certainly worth a hell of a lot more than is actually functionally useful. So gold is a useful material, right? It doesn't react to oxygen. You can use it for different things. People like it for jewelry, shit like that. But the amount people pay for it is far more than its functional use. And people pay, there's a premium on it because people view it as a store of value. And why do people view it as a store of value? Because other people view it as a store of value. It's all a shared story that we tell ourselves. So when I urge you, when you think about something like Bitcoin, be like, oh, it's fake, it's on computers, blah, blah. Okay. Well, then let's talk about what's gold. Gold is a random element it has some nice properties, but that humanity has chosen to attribute value to. So what is cash? Cash used to be tied to gold. Well, we're not on the gold standard anymore. What is it on? It's backed by the full faith and credit of that government. Well, what's to stop the government from just issuing a lot more money like they're doing now? What's to stop, fortunately in developed countries, we've sometimes seen this happen, but in developing countries, you get the wrong guy in power, he'll nuke your currency, your life saving is gone, zilch, boom, over. Okay? So, cash doesn't exactly have or fiat currency doesn't exactly have the best track record either. So I encourage you to think about these things. What is value? Okay. Perfect. And I see that Fiona is on. We've got just 3 minutes. We'll have Fiona Harvey on. I appreciate you joining Fiona. Just checking. I'll cue you in. And feel free to share your video if you're comfortable. We get you on in about 3 minutes. Very excited to riff with you. Let's talk about a couple more points here. This brilliant feature of Bitcoin was designed by the anonymous creator. Okay, so it has a fixed maximum supply. There's a maximum supply of 21 million that'll be mined by 2140. This brilliant feature of Bitcoin was designed by the anonymous creator of Bitcoin to protect its integrity by making it increasingly near and dear, a concept alien to the current thinking of central banks and governments. Interestingly, Bitcoin is the only store of value that actually trades 24/7 in the entire world. So that was the flavor behind some of the discussions that were had when scoring the suitability of each asset as a store of value. They did an exercise at his firm to attribute certain scores to different things. Gold, financial assets like equities and bonds, cash. And then what was surprising to me was not that Bitcoin came in last, but that it scored as high as it did. Bitcoin had an overall survey. This isn't based on actual fact, right? But it's based on, some smart people riffing on it. It scores 66% of gold as a store of value, but has a market cap that is 1/60th of gold's outstanding value. Something appears wrong here. My guess it is the price of Bitcoin. I'm not an advocate of Bitcoin ownership in isolation, but do recognize its potential in a period when we have the most unorthodox economic policies in modern history. And that's what we talked about with that Warren Buffett quote. This is total uncertainty right now. We are in a brave new world, as they say, and we've riffed on this on the show. There's no such thing as normal. Every decade, there's some massive humanity-changing event, and we build it into the system. And some decades have certainly more change than others, but the only constant is change. That's the only constant. Okay, that's where we're at, and I encourage you to be wary of people offering certainty in things you cannot be certain of. We are in a very, very special time. So we've got Fiona here. She's currently muted. Let me switch up my setup here. Fiona, I see you perfectly. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to flip the stream here so that people can see you, which will make for a better show. Okay, let's just go here. Boom. Okay, so Fiona, you are unmuted. Are you with me? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes. Hello.
Okay, hello, Fiona. Thank you so much for joining. Let me try to make your screen here a little bigger on my end. Because we got, actually, you know what? You're good. Charlie, by the way, your video is being shown. Okay, Fiona, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Just want to give a quick intro. So as we said at the beginning of the show, Fiona Harvey is she's a journalist. She was environmental journalist. We're going to talk about climate change. She was at the Financial Times for about a decade, and now she's at the Guardian. She's a very prolific writer. We're going to link to her profile on the Guardian. She's churning out a lot of articles. I read through some of them. Fiona, I love the work you're doing. It's awesome how much you're writing, and I love your objective takes you're taking on things. You don't seem to write from the left or the right. You seem to just give it right down, not necessarily the middle, but you're not getting too political in what you're saying. You're just laying it out, which I really appreciate writing like that. So, Fiona, thank you so much for being on here, and how you doing?
Great, thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be on.
Okay, awesome. Right on. Okay, so just the first question, and I know I've been thinking this, and we talked about this in the intro of the show, is COVID-19 making you see climate change in a new light? Is it making you think about how the world needs to respond to problems?
Yes, I think that the crisis is making people think very differently about a lot of issues related to climate change. In one way, of course, it's having a very direct impact. We're seeing greenhouse gas emissions falling as a result of the lockdowns in place around the world. Now, that is likely to be a temporary effect, but it's interesting to see what's going on there. But we shouldn't confuse that impact with the kind of the long-term structural changes that we need to make to the global economy if we are to bring down greenhouse gases on a permanent basis. This sudden, sharp shock to the economy is not what anyone who wants to see climate change tackled would have wanted. It's not a good thing, and the resulting decline in emissions is an effect, but it's only very temporarily beneficial. It will make very, very little difference in terms of climate change, unless we take this opportunity to make a more permanent difference. And that, I think, is the real impact of COVID-19, is that it teaches us to look at our world in a different way. We need to look at what sort of things we value as people, as human beings, and we also need to look at how our economy operates and how our economy could operate, because we've got to come out of lockdown and we have a lot of choices about how we bring the economy back up. We've got choices about where we spend the public money that nearly all countries around the world are planning to spend to try to rescue their economies. We have choices about how we change our behavior. Perhaps do we maintain some of the behaviors that have been forced upon us by lockdown and the coronavirus crisis? How do we facilitate those broader behavioral changes around the world? For instance, a lot more people are working from home, doing things remotely, socializing remotely, and so on. And doing that is generally a good thing in climate change terms, because it means less flying, less other forms of transport. It can mean, if it's done right, it can mean less greenhouse gas going into the atmosphere. So we might want to try to keep some of those behaviors, perhaps not to the extent that we're doing them now, but to encourage people to continue living like that in some way. More people are cycling and walking, and people are enjoying the lack of air pollution and so on. So we don't want to just go back to a dirty world, and we don't need to.
Right, and I want to touch on something that you talked about. You talked about how the governments are spending money to make up the gap for the lack of for the fact that the economy has been big parts of the economy have been shut down. So you recently wrote about an Oxford University study which compared green stimulus projects to those from to those from the '08 during the global financial crisis, the stimulus projects during that time. And this study found that the green stimulus projects deliver higher short-term returns, and I'm quoting it right now, higher short-term returns per pound spent by the government and lead to an increased long-term cost savings. My question to you, given how quickly the economy tanked, is this something that's feasible when dealing with kind of green stimulus, which is going to be certainly more politicized than just throwing money at everything? Is this something that is feasible in your mind right now, given that the assistance and the jolt to the economy needs to be given right away, instead of spend months deliberating on it? I'm curious how you think we can go forward and hopefully get some more money to some of these green projects. But do you think that's feasible?
Yes, because what this Oxford study found, one of the most interesting things they found, was that a green stimulus delivers more in the short term as well as in the long term. And so a lot of the projects that we're talking about in terms of the green stimulus are what they call shovel ready. So you can start in on them very, very quickly,
Right.
and they create a lot of jobs. So these would be jobs in, for instance, doing things like insulating houses that
Right.
are poorly insulated at the moment to make them more energy efficient.
Right.
It would be things like fitting homes with solar panels so they could generate their own energy. It could be things in established industries, such as constructing wind farms or building the technology for wind farms. It could be diverting some of our existing industries, such as, for instance, the car manufacturing industry,
Right.
which in various areas has taken a hit. It could be directed at making electric cars in place of our gas guzzlers. So there are ways both to start green infrastructure projects that will have a lot of benefits straight away, and ways to stimulate existing industries in a green direction.
Now, specifically, do you think some of these, if in Parliament or in Congress stateside, if some of these proposals were put into, were proposed, for lack of, since this whole thing started, but do you think that politically is that feasible?
Oh, very much so, because
Okay.
I think that if you can demonstrate the benefits to people, if you can say, well, there's a choice here. There are these old, dirty jobs that are in a troubled area of the economy, or there are these new green jobs that have all kinds of co-benefits, such as cleaner air and cleaner water and reducing climate change and all the rest of it. Um, we have we have a choice about whether we just go back to the old dirty way of doing things or whether we choose a cleaner future. And a cleaner future will generate more jobs now and will generate more jobs in the future and will generate more money for the public purse, as well as all these other benefits in terms of health. It seems like a pretty obvious choice to me. It's not that no one's being asked to make a sacrifice here, apart from some of the industries that are in dreadful trouble already, such as the oil industry, because the oil price has gone down.
Right.
Um, what you need to do is to just reassure people that actually green jobs are permanent jobs. They're not just, it's not just a flash in the pan. If
Right.
you switch people from the old fossil fuel industries to working in new green energy industries, those are the jobs of the future, and they will continue to be there and continue to generate employment and generate investment and generate returns.
Totally. So I agree with all that, but I think you're a little bit more optimistic than me. In a country right now, I'm in the United States where EPA regulations and emission regulations have actually gone in the opposite direction. I'm yeah I'm we even before COVID-19, it's very difficult to pass some of the. I know the federal electric vehicle subsidy in the United States. I think that expired recently. So we're not even seeing even for all the reasons you said why it's the smart move. We're not even seeing our government do that. So I'm wondering if I'm curious. Is it like that? Is it like that in the UK as well? Because maybe it's a little bit better over there than it is in the United States.
Well, yes. I mean, I think in the United States, unfortunately, President Trump is not very interested in anything that's green,
Right.
and that's unfortunate
Not even green foods,
because
not even salads.
sorry.
He doesn't even eat salad. Anything green, it's just meat and oil. That's what he does. So it was a joke. It's all good.
Yeah, but no, I think it's a joke with a lot of truth in it.
Right.
But it's unfortunate that he's taken that attitude because it runs counter to what an awful lot of very smart and very well-educated economists
Right.
would say, and it also runs counter to what an awful lot of industries and business people are saying, and it also runs counter to what an awful lot of states, state governments and local governments in the
Right.
United States are saying. And it runs counter to where a lot of the jobs are. It runs counter to a lot of people's actual experience of getting employment in new green jobs. And if they were given a bit of a boost, which is available to the president to offer, then there could be even more people in these green jobs. In Europe and in the United Kingdom, I think we are more willing to look at this, and we have an awful lot of industries, but they're everywhere. They're around the world. These industries that are able to present us with a future that really, if they were given the opportunity, if they were given the backing, the public money, and so on, that they really could create a new green economy. And we're already seeing signs of that.
Does Brexit, does the UK leaving the European Union, does that make it easier or more difficult for them to address climate change?
In theory, it shouldn't make any difference at all. In practice, I think the main difference is that it's a distraction. The energy that's going into Brexit
Right.
could have gone into greening the economy. We have a plan in the UK, and the government is committed to it, to be net zero emissions by 2050. That's a hard thing to do. It's going to require a lot of structural change to the economy, as well as some behavioral change. But it's possible. And our advisors, the people who advise the government, they have laid out the fact that it's possible and some of the ways in which we can do it. But the thing about it is, if you want to get there in 2050, you really need to start now. And so we really need our politicians to be very much focused on how to get to net zero as quickly as possible. And my only fear is that with Brexit, that if Brexit is your overriding concern, then everything else takes a back seat, and we really can't afford to let net zero take a back seat.
Right.
So we'll see. The COVID crisis is taking up everyone's attention at the moment. So all kinds of things have had to be delayed. I just hope that people are taking this opportunity to regroup and rethink and reset what the priorities are.
Right. Never let a crisis go to waste. So I want to ask you about carbon taxes. Do you think this is a viable way to address climate change?
There are several kinds of carbon tax, and yes, definitely. carbon taxes in various forms are a way to address climate change, but they're not the only way, and they have to be used carefully. And one of the forms of carbon tax that I think we should be looking at very carefully at the moment is the role of a carbon tax in trade, in international trade. Because you just talked about Brexit, and Brexit is all about trade.
Right.
And how the UK trades with other nations. The British government is at the moment in talks with the White House and the American government to try and get a trade deal. So, you know, trade is on the table, and if international trade is on the table, then you've got to look at carbon taxes as part of that. Now, what we've seen in the United States, we've seen Mr. Trump has taken quite a protectionist stance in a lot of ways, and a lot of people are worried that there's going to be a trade war between the United States and China, if that's not already begun.
Right,
right. In some ways, it's not fully fledged yet, but its beginnings are certainly there. So in that context, you could look at countries, various countries around the world, could look at putting in a carbon tax at their borders, so that if you want to be allowed to export into a country, then you've got to show that your goods are low carbon. Otherwise, you will have to pay a tax at the border. And that could be a very effective weapon in terms of taking countries who are laggards in terms of dealing with climate change, because climate change is a global problem.
Right.
And if some countries are refusing to take up their responsibility, then using a border tax on carbon defensively could be a way of encouraging those laggard countries to keep up.
Right on. Now, I want to ask with it, and this is how I found you. You recently, in a foreign affairs survey, you disagreed that nuclear energy should be a central piece of the fight against climate change, and you disagreed with a high degree of certainty. And I want to ask you why.
Well, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with nuclear energy in some respects if it's done right, but the danger is that we get caught up in trying to put forward nuclear energy projects, trying to look to nuclear energy as some kind of savior, and it's not, and we don't have time to get this wrong. Nuclear energy projects in most places around the world, they take decades from start to fruition. If you look at the UK at the moment, we've got the first nuclear power station in, I think it's in about 30 years or more.
Right.
That new nuclear power station is supposed to be well underway by now. It's not. It's years behind schedule. It's going to be enormously expensive. It's going to be far, far more expensive than any other form of energy, and that's going to be paid for by the bill payer, the people who use the electricity. So it's years behind schedule. It's tens of billions of dollars over budget, and we still have no idea when it will actually be generating power. And that's just one nuclear power station. So there is no way that nuclear power is going to be the centerpiece
right.
of the answer to climate change in the UK. We're seeing similar issues in a lot of other developed countries. In the United States, very difficult to imagine that you'll see a lot of new nuclear projects getting off the ground anytime soon. Similarly in Japan after the Fukushima disaster. Similarly in Germany, where they've been closing down nuclear power plants. Even in France, which is the kind of poster child
right.
For nuclear energy, they're having problems with their new nuclear reactor that's under construction. Again, it's billions over budget and it's way, way behind schedule. So in a lot of places around the world, nuclear energy is just going to be too slow. Because if you look at what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is telling us, it's saying that we need to bring down emissions so fast. We really need to have turned that corner in the next decade and brought down emissions from a peak and start bringing them down, start halving emissions. We need to effectively get to net zero by 2050, which is only 30 years away. And 30 years, when you've taken, in the UK, you've just taken 10 years to get to the point where you're even beginning to clear the land and
Right.
pour the concrete for a nuclear reactor. We don't have enough time to wait to get nuclear on board. When you can put up a wind farm very, very quickly, when you can put up solar panels very, very quickly, when you can you can do lots of green activities like insulating houses, like building electric cars, like changing our infrastructure. All of that is much quicker than building new nuclear power plants. So it's not that I'm saying nuclear doesn't have a role. Clearly, in some regions, it does have a role. And clearly, it's important to keep what nuclear power we have at the moment, rather than replace it with something with fossil fuels like coal. But it's hard to see that nuclear is some kind of savior.
So then, do you think that it's wind and solar? Is that what's gonna be the are those the number two or the two technologies that are gonna help make our grid clean?
Yeah, because they're the cheapest.
Okay, so let me ask you this. One of the issues with wind and solar is that if the wind isn't blowing in certain, if the wind's not blowing, it's not generating energy, and also if the sun isn't shining, it's not generating energy. Whereas in a good thing about coal. Or a good thing about natural gas, or these oil is that you can turn these things on, and you can effectively use them to increase or decrease output, really with just not the flip of a switch, but it's a lot easier to do that than with something like wind or solar. So do you think is it what can help address that gap that wind and solar have? Is it batteries? Is it let's charge up batteries that can then pump energy into the grid, or is it something else? Because I think it's generally considered that there is a gap there that needs to still be addressed.
Batteries are useful, but the most important thing is to see the energy system in a holistic way. So just give one quick example. Building a lot of big batteries in one place would be quite hard. However, if you had a lot of electric vehicles, then they are effectively batteries. So if you had them, so for instance, you get more wind energy at night generally.
Right.
So if if the electric cars were taking their energy at night, storing them in their battery, then you could use that energy during the day. Similarly, solar obviously only generates during the day, but what you can do is you can see your energy sources as part of a grid, rather than just seeing them as discrete. It's not just that your solar panels on your house power your house, and
Right.
that's not the only thing they do. What you need is those solar panels on your house to be feeding in to a grid, and that grid needs to encompass wind, solar, any other forms of renewable energy such as biomass and biogas, and balance them all out over a wide area. So batteries are important, but more important than that is grid technology to get everything connected in such a way that it's responsive and smart grid.
So
because If you think about it, the bigger your grid, the more likely it is that, it's in some area of your grid, if it's big enough, the wind will be blowing. So you will be generating wind energy.
Right.
If your grid is big enough, again, there will be lots of areas of storage, so that when it's nighttime and the sun isn't shining, you've got that energy to give back, and it can be balanced across the grid. That's what's absolutely key, that you've got a holistic view of your energy system, and you've got the technology in place that you can balance that energy and take that energy across a whole vast grid. And at the moment, unfortunately, we haven't invested in our grids to that extent. We haven't put that smart technology in, but we can do.
So when you're saying vast grids, now you're talking about grids that are spanning continents, right? Because there's a lot of countries, solar and wind, it's just not viable. Like there's certain regions where the angle of the sun, it's not gonna generate the.
No, that's just nonsense.
So okay, so that's not true. So you're saying every country, besides maybe some extremes in the north and south, whatever, but every country can address their energy needs using solar as a solution?
No, I'm not saying that every country can generate all of their energy from solar. No, but I'm saying that there are very few problems with solar energy, and saying that it's not suitable in some regions is just not true. It's suitable, around the world. It can be used around the world. Similarly with wind, the wind blows around the world. And
right.
It blows, there's more wind in some areas than others.
Right, and I think that's my point.
Areas that, the UK has a lot of wind because,
right.
It's an island and geographically where it is. Similarly, you have some areas where it's easier to generate tidal energy, or if you had a decent project, you could do wave energy and so on. Some areas may not have that, but the sun shines, unless you're in Antarctica, when you don't get sun for quite a few months of the year, or at the very top of the world. But people tend not to live there.
Right.
In areas that don't have sun for 6 months of the year.
But certainly there's regions that are a lot more cloudy than others, right?
Yeah, there are regions that are cloudy, but you can generate solar energy on a cloudy day. You generate more energy. The sunnier it is, the more energy you generate. That's true.
Right.
But you can generate solar energy on solar panels on a cloud.
As others, that it's a substantial enough solution that it's worth investing in.
In most areas of the world, you can use solar power. In some areas, it'll be much easier than others.
Right.
But in most areas of the world, you can use wind as well. It's not about just trying for one solution.
Right.
All the way around the world. You need a combination of things. You need solar, you need wind, you need to bring in these other energies if you've got them. Why wouldn't you use tidal if you've got it? Why wouldn't you use hydroelectricity if it's feasible?
Right.
It's not always feasible, and sometimes it can be ecologically harmful, so you've got to be really careful with hydro. But that you don't need a blanket ban on it. In some areas it is quite feasible.
Totally.
And you have other sources like biogas and generating electricity from waste and so on. In some areas, biomass can be quite a useful source. So you've got a suite of different technologies that can be used around the world. It's not like you're just saying, okay, over here you can only have solar, over there you can only have wind. Oh, hey, look, it doesn't work. It's not like that.
Right. I'd be curious, do you recommend any sources for looking, because based on things I've read, I think it would differ a little bit than with what you're saying, but I'm very curious about some of the sources that you like. Maybe it's in the that inner governmental panel. Is there some assessment on, okay, these regions are better for these types of energy generating things like solar or wind, or do you have anything like that, or recommend a kind of direction to look at for information like that? Because I think you're making great points, and I'd love to dive more into that.
There's an organization called the International Energy Agency
Perfect.
that produces a World Energy Outlook every year. That's got basically it's a kind of Bible in terms of energy statistics. There's the International Renewable Energy Association. There's the World Energy Council. There's a lot of organizations that produce data in different forms that could probably help you with that.
Perfect. We'll definitely link to those in the show notes. So and I really appreciate your time here as we kind of wrap things up. Is there some, as a journalist who you've made your livelihood covering the environment, and that's what you've gone all in on. I'm curious if there's things that you look at in public discourse or even around the dinner table that you think people, some single major thing that you wish more people understood about the things that you write about climate change? Are there things that that is a lot of people are being misguided by? Is there something that's out there that you kind of just like, well, I wish everyone understood this one thing because people don't seem to get it?
I think what people don't understand is the urgency of this and the fact that
Right.
it's going to happen whether we want it to or not, really. But it doesn't matter what attitude we take. It doesn't matter whether we who we vote for or what we believe in. The fact is that the more we put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the more we will change the world's climate.
Right.
And that is a simple physical fact. It's physics and chemistry, and it's immutable.
Right.
And that's just going to happen, whatever we do. So what we need to do is to stop doing the thing that we know is changing the climate if we don't want to have a disaster. And I think there's a lot of people who sort of haven't really grasped the fact that this is real. This isn't something that you can argue over. You can't change the laws of physics.
Right.
So we better just get on and deal with the things that we can change.
Right. One more question that just popped in my head because I think a lot of the solutions that that we've talked about the past half hour is on the kind of the government, kind of the industrial level. What would you recommend to individuals that want to that want to make a little bit of difference in this fight of climate change? What is something that you tell people? If you do this thing, that's gonna help lower emissions. Is there something you tell people how they can help in the fight?
I think that's going to differ for every individual, really, because I think that some people are in a position where maybe they could. Maybe they're finding in the COVID crisis that they could work from home.
Right.
Totally. And so they don't need to be, generating all those emissions from commuting. Maybe some people are finding that they could cycle instead of driving a car, or maybe, people are finding things in their individual lives at the moment. But the thing is that we can't change this as individuals. We can make a difference as individuals, but we can't make the huge amount of difference that's needed just by changing our own behavior. We need to change the systems. So we need to change how we generate energy and what we do with our energy. We need to change how we produce food. And what we do with the food that we produce. There are lots of different things that need to happen at a very big scale, not just at the scale of what I do in my life. And I think we need to recognize that and give our leaders the signal that we actually want a livable world and not a world that we have destroyed by continuing to generate too much carbon dioxide.
Right. So vote sounds like might be a good a good solution. Okay, Fiona, this is everyone. Fiona Harvey. Fiona, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you sharing with us, and keep doing your thing. We talk about what individuals can do, and you're writing a lot of. You're a very prolific writer on this stuff, and just keep doing your thing because you're moving the needle. I've certainly read your stuff, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your beliefs. And I'm hopefully we can talk in 30 years and say, wow, we actually ended up solving this whole thing, but maybe not. But we'll see. Okay, Fiona, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Okay, everyone, that was Fiona Harvey. I'll be linking to her Twitter account in the show notes, and also to her Guardian profile. She writes a hell of a lot on not only climate change, but also she's an environmental journalist, so she covers a lot of this stuff. And she has really good writing. Just the way she talks about these things. It's not from a left or right perspective. It's from a physics. It's from a science. It's from let's not politicize it, but let's talk about the issue here. And I'm curious to follow up those. On some of those resources she gave us, because it was my understanding. This is why I love bringing people on. It was my understanding that certain regions, solar and wind, are not viable. So I certainly hope I'm wrong about that. I haven't done much research on that. I just remember reading that a couple years ago. So I'm happy to report back next week on that. Make a note to do that, because I think that's a super important thing as we think about how we can actually address this. Is it solar? Is it wind? Is that going to be enough? Fiona, she's the Fukin expert. She says it is, and she gave some sources there. So we're going to link to those sources as well. So that's a little bit mind blowing for me. That would be Fukin epic if we can address it with solar and wind. And she talked about nuclear, how it's just expensive and how slow that is, even in France, as she said, the poster child of this stuff. So this is interesting stuff. We're not going to solve it in one podcast. We're not going to solve it in a year. This is a decades-long effort. That's why we think in decades, because that's how this stuff works. So Barlow, if we got any questions, hit me in Google Hangouts. Just send them to me now, because we're going to be wrapping up here. This will be the Fukin shortest show we have in a while, maybe the shortest show ever. So I see you typing a little bit. If we've got some questions or anything that we want to riff on last minute, hit me with that stuff. If not, if we got goose egg, well, then we're good to go. Don't need to stay on the line any longer than we have to here. Again, we do this every Saturday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. First hour, me, you, Chuck, Finch, Finley, we're riffing on these topics. So we didn't get to everything I wanted to get to. Howard Marks' uncertainty. I still want to read some of the quotes from there. Also didn't have a chance to talk about Reddit, the Reddit cryptocurrency. They're dipping their toes in that. There are 300 million active users per month. That was as of 2019, so I think it's a little bit bigger now. But they're starting to dip their toes into blockchain technology, and this is the biggest online platform that's starting to do that, which is huge, which is fascinating. So it's a small little, it's a beta test basically, but it's crazy that they're actually even dipping their toes in. That's a really good sign. So we'll talk more about that. We'll talk more about that next week. Also, we're going to talk about some new powers the FBI received with being able to look at your browsing history without a warrant. Quick thing on that. Okay, I'm getting reports from Chuck Fitch Finley that we do have goose eggs on the questions. That's all chill. That means everything was answered and no one had questions about anything, which we love. No, actually, we want questions. We want people in here riffing. But we're going to talk a little about that next week. Hopefully, unless something else just fucking blows it apart. Again, every Saturday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, first hour, we're riffing. Then we try to have interviews, 1 p.m., maybe a couple, no more than 2. We did 3 one one time, and I think it was a little bit much to cram that all in there. So please give me feedback. If you have any feedback, you got my number. Post in the comments, dick@nogradient.com. We also follow all the links to all this stuff are in the show notes. You can follow me on Twitter @DickCLucas and on Instagram @DickCLucas as well. And I basically talk exclusively on those platforms about what we're doing on the show and the things we're going to cover. I think that about Fukin does it. Oh, it's available. Always got to say this, wherever podcasts are available. Just search No Gradient, no space Gradient, wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podcatcher, Fukin, or wait, Podcatcher? No, Pocket Cast. It streams on YouTube and it streams on Periscope. And also, so the audio version is up about 2 hours after the show is published is up on YouTube. Takes us a couple hours to just Chuck Finch edits it up and uploads it. Also Patreon, you can become a monthly contributor and you get full access to the show notes. You can also get access to the Zoom call if you want to be on that. So when we bring these interviewees on, kind of get a little backstage access. So depending on how much you contribute per month. And okay, we do have one question that we'll wrap up, and I appreciate Nice Things. Matt Buckley, if you need an iOS app, Matt Buckley's making good things at Nice Things. He's a great developer. He's a legend. He has one question here. We're going to wrap. And we've already done the housekeeping stuff. You know where to find the show. I sound like a broken record with this. Wherever podcasts are available, YouTube, Periscope, streaming. That's where you find it. And we're going to address this question from Fukin Matt Buckley. He's a total legend. Good homie. And then we're going to wrap this Fuker up. Okay. He wants to talk about cryptocurrency is a store of value versus the technology, which is more important. So one thing I think, and this is what I said with the Paul Tudor Jones piece, and what was his quote? Yeah, so his quote was, let's see. He said, and the newest entrant is Bitcoin, which seems to have emerged from the crypto war of 2017 as the clear winner with a market cap. So hold on, newest entrant. He's talking about as a store of value, not as a newest entrant. It's the first cryptocurrency. So he's saying a newest entrant is Bitcoin, which seems to have emerged from the crypto war of 2017 is the clear winner with a market cap 10x its closest competitor. So something I want to talk about. The next biggest by market cap is Ethereum, and it does not have nearly as big as a market cap as Bitcoin, but it serves a different purpose. So, and I know you're not talking about the price necessarily, you're just talking about whether it is a store of value, but all these cryptocurrencies, you're seeing most of them are snake oil. There's, and we'll see what everyone's experimenting with, and we'll see what rises. Maybe in 10 years, Bitcoin's not being used, Ethereum's not being used, maybe it's something else. But Ethereum, not all cryptocurrencies are the same. They're not all about being able to pay, and they're not all about being a store of value. Ethereum is a platform that allows you to run decentralized applications. Now they're limited right now, but they're getting better. It allows you to run do special computational things on the blockchain. They can't be shut down. They can't be censored. These applications, and it has a token, an Ether token, that allows you to pay for gas, but it's also, you can use it. You can send it. It can also be used as store of value, but it's not its main intent. Now you use Ether to pay for gas to run these transactions, which allows you to run computations on that platform. But in terms of the store of value versus the technology, I think talking about Bitcoin specifically, I think the store of value, its ability to be a store of value, part of that is tied to the technology, right? If the technology didn't work, if people didn't trust it, it would not be a store of value. That's one of the brilliant things with Bitcoin, is that it was released, Fukin, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, and so far, it has upheld its mission. Now, originally, if you read the Satoshi Nakamoto, who's the pseudo-anonymous person or persons who developed Bitcoin, the white paper on this, it's about 9 pages. There's some things on there not even I understand, but your average layperson, I think, can read it and understand what he was getting at. Now, he did talk about, I don't know if he said digital cash. He did talk about using it as a payment platform, being able to pay people with it. Now, given how long it takes to verify a transaction and the fees associated with that, it's looking like it's more of a store of value rather than something you'll go to a Starbucks with and pay for a cup of coffee with. But if it wouldn't be a store of value if people didn't trust it. If people could duplicate Bitcoins, if people could compromise the network, then no one would trust it and it would go to zero, which is why it's so fascinating. The incentive structure, the miners, any node can join the network and join the network and mine blocks. That's how the whole network works. And then also verify transactions. Anyone can do that. And if there was even nodes join the network, even if they're trying to do bad, nefarious things, even if they're saying, I sent Chuck Finley a transaction when I didn't actually, the network can mitigate that and can protect itself against that. Why? Because the miners on the network want it to run well. They want it to run well because then the value that they get from the Bitcoins that they earn remains high, or at least doesn't drop through the floor. Now, if the network was compromised, if the technology wasn't good enough, people wouldn't trust it. And there's different things like 51% attacks, where if there's enough computing power, which I think the NSA could totally do in like a long weekend, they could totally run a 51% attack against the Bitcoin network and start doing nefarious things, for example, or even like with Google's infrastructure, a big tech company could certainly do that. But even with that, that doesn't necessarily allow them to go rewrite old transactions from 2 years ago. So the longer transactions been on the blockchain, the higher likelihood that it is set in stone. That's why you say it takes about 10 minutes per block, something like that. So you wait for like 6 confirmations before you say, okay, the money has actually been sent from account A to account B. So yes, the technology needs to work, or else no one's going to fucking trust it. And also in the white paper, which it's people are very principled about this. Satoshi Nakamoto, I believe it was in the white paper, he said this. He said there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins issued. We're at about 18.5 million issued right now. The last one will be mined around 2140. It's a fixed cap amount. There will be no more. And if the other side of the technology is not just the technology has to work, the community around it, the miners. If the miners decided, oh, actually, no, we're going to allow 30 million. We're going to pump more Bitcoins in the market right now because the price is high and we need money right now. And then they wouldn't, if they did that, people wouldn't trust it. So it's not just the technology, it's all about the trust. It's about what people do with the technology, because Bitcoin is, if all the miners conspired, if all the people running the network got together and said, yo, let's screw with this thing, they could do it. But they don't have an incentive to do that, because that would, all their hardware that they have, all the things that they use to mine Bitcoin, it would drop the value of Bitcoin. It would make their hardware useless. It wouldn't allow them to make any more money. So there's a vested interest there. So it's a very, very interesting technology. Again, I want to say this and then we'll close out here. Chuck Finley probably has another final he's got to do. But don't just throw fucking all your money at Bitcoin. Don't even throw close to that. If you are interested in it and you even just want to play with it, buy a few bucks, send it to a friend. It's fun to play with. Or do amount that you're comfortable with losing. That's what I say to anyone. Everyone's gonna have their own risk tolerance. I'm not gonna say, oh, put 1%, put 10%, put 20%. Everyone's got their own risk tolerance. I encourage you to do your own research. Always do your own research with this shit. Never listen to some guy in a podcast that's telling you to buy something. If they're telling you for sure to do anything when it comes to buying something, whether it's a stock, whether it's a cryptocurrency, whether it's anything, you should run. You should look the other way. Doesn't mean I'm not going to give recommendations on, and we can riff more about this stuff later. Recommendations on which cryptocurrencies I'm most interested in and which ones I'm following, and which ones I've purchased. We can talk about that, but certainly be weary of anyone telling you to do anything with your own money, which is why I always tell people you gotta become financially literate. I have a blog post on this, which I'll link to. Lowest hanging fruit. If you search no gradient lowest hanging fruit, I tell you what to do with your money. And these are things that I didn't make up. These are things that the experts are saying. And these are things that have stood the test of time. Buy the market, use index funds, use your IRA, use your 401k, use things like this. But I encourage you. No one's the same. No one has the same risk tolerance. No one has the same goals, because not everyone's gonna have the same saving. Because what if you want to go do something? What if you want to become financially independent within 10 years? What if you want to, live on a boat and you don't want to buy a house? What if you want to do, what if you want to travel the world? There's all these different things. So the more you know about what to do with your money, the better you'll be able to make those decisions for yourself and not have to rely on someone like me or some financial advisor or your uncle to give you, those hot stock tips at the dinner table. Not that I have an uncle that does that. I actually don't, but that would be chill if I did. Okay, everyone, this was, we didn't have the little outro music. This was, what is the title of this? It's a long fucking title. My sister helped me out with that. Climate change is the next test, and we've been failing all the quizzes. We're going to be talking about things that are going to be important the next decade. We're going to riff on these things. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep having people on. We're going to keep building this show. We're going to keep having fun. So 1 hour, 50 minutes. Not bad, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me and Chuck Finch Finley. Really appreciate it. Wherever podcasts are available, No Gradient. Streaming live every Saturday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's fucking go, people. Thanks for coming. Let's keep going. Let's keep riffing. Let's keep learning. And we're going to talk more about solar and wind next week. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining. So I put a razor blade in my mouth, and I went like this.